Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the Fight Archive, or the MMA Fight Archive, where we just surpassed over 6,000 fighter profiles for you to browse through, research, and help you predict, analyze, and break down fights as they come. We have pretty much the entire schedule of 2025 up there, spanning 20 different promotions, and like I said, over 6,000 fighter profiles as well. We've surpassed 120 subscribers. Again, you get a 7-day free trial to check it out for free. So if you enjoy breaking down fights yourself and want to save yourself a boatload of time to have everything you need for a fighter on one page, the MMA Fight Archive is for you. So make sure you guys check that bad boy out. All right. After a pay-per-view showcase for the UFC this past weekend, we go back to the UFC Apex for UFC Vegas 110, which is headlined by a featherweight matchup between David Onama and Steve Garcia. The co-main event offers up Waldo Cortes-Acosta in a heavyweight matchup, going up against recent UFC signee and looking to continue to build the momentum after Delija knocked out Marcin Tybura just a few months back. A lot of people are shitting on the main event in terms of Onama against Garcia. If it was the co-main event or something like that, I'm sure people would be more excited for it. But to put in a main event slot, a lot of people have been kind of, talking about the distaste for that. I don't mind it. I'm going to watch whatever it is. These guys will surely put on an entertaining matchup. Do they have name value to headliner card? Probably not. But if you guys remember, we also got some pretty... we got Michelle Waterson against Angela Hill in the Apex just a few years ago. We've had some pretty bad main events in the past. So entertainment-wise, this one should deliver. All right. Let's quickly go over... Actually, you know what? I do want to shout out the live stream that we had for the UFC 321 card this past weekend. I had one of my subscribers from the YouTube memberships hop on that, and we were able to enjoy the fights, all 6.5 hours of it. So I appreciate my guy Matthew Fowler coming through for that. And now I will get into the full swing of my live stream. So Wednesdays from tentatively, it is set from what are we going to do? 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to go live for the members only live stream. I'll have, I've chose Wednesday because I want that to be a day or two for you guys to ingest this MMA Lockcast episode and then come back on Wednesday and talk it out with you guys and see what you guys want to talk about. For that, any concerns, critiques, all that type of stuff, that's what the members only live stream is going to be for. And then on Saturdays of Fight Week, I'll be doing another members only live stream from 1 p.m. Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern, doing Fight Day live chat like I used to. So if you want to hop in on that, hit that join button right below the video here. $2 a month for 2 streams a week. I think that's more than worthy and more than affordable, especially to help keep the stream, positive, keep it flowing, conversations well. I would love to see you guys hop on there as well. So appreciate you guys for supporting the channel in the first place. Now, if you want to communicate with your boy and jump on those live streams, I feel like those 2 streams a week would be more than worth it for, again, a toonie per month. So make sure you guys hit that join button, and I hope to see most of you guys on Wednesday, like I said, from 7 p.m. Eastern to 8 p.m. Eastern, talking about those fights. All right, let's quickly do a recap of this past weekend's UFC card. I've been on a slump. I believe it's about 4 straight events now where I've really shit the bed. It's gotten, slightly worse each time out, so that's a little bit of a consolation prize, but I've really been shitting the bed with a lot of these lock of the night plays, and most recently, it was Jailton Almeida at -195 as he went up against Alexander Volkov. Split decision loss. I can't be mad. Again, lock of the night plays are not supposed to be that close. They are supposed to be dominant, and they're supposed to be one-sided, and Almeida was not able to get off on enough damage with his takedowns. He got the takedowns with ease, But holding guys is not going to get the job done, and Almeida really suffered, especially in that last round when he gave up a ton of damage in that first minute to the knees of Volkov, and I think that's ultimately what won Volkov that decision. So we went 0-1 on this weekend for this lock of the night plays. That now brings our record to 52-35 for a 60% hit rate. Atrocious. Again, I am not proud of it whatsoever. Not a good run for the lock of the night plays. We had a good run in the middle of the year, but as this year starts to end off, we are taking a bit of an L there. So hoping to jump back into the win column this weekend with either a UFC lock of the night play. We also have OKTAGON, which I'll be breaking down obviously for you guys later. I'll talk about that in a second. For dog of the night plays, we went Junyoung Park plus 225. I really expected him to put that pace and pressure on Alencar, especially in that third round where it looked like Alencar was really starting to slow down. But credit to the Russian fighter for getting that takedown and getting the back of Park. I was really hoping to see better cardio from Park, better resistance, more activity later on in that matchup, but he just couldn't really stifle the game of Alencar. So we take an L on the dog of the night play. I believe it was LFA that we took an L on as well for our lock of the night play, or dog of the night play, I should be saying. So that now brings our dog of the night record to 51-58 for a 47% hit rate. I am firmly in the profit for a dog of the night play, so I'm happy about that. But again, I'd like to get closer to that 50% hit rate. 60% would be great, but again, it's kind of tough picking underdogs. So as long as we hit 50%, I'm more than happy. But again, we are already in the profit anyway. All right, this weekend, not only do we have UFC Vegas 110, but we also have OKTAGON 79. I'll only be doing quick picks for that on the Lock of the Night Patreon page in written form, so make sure you guys check that out. It won't be a YouTube breakdown. I'll have final plays for that, hopefully a Lock of the Night play if I like something enough. And then, like I said, make sure you guys check out the YouTube membership thing that I just started up this past weekend. 2 streams a week. Wednesdays, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, and Saturdays, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. Might be earlier on Saturdays sometimes, given what time the card normally kicks off, but it is for the UFC shows there for you guys to get your fight day thoughts out to your boy and me, hopefully help you talk through some of those plays and picks. All right. I believe we have 13 fights for this UFC Vegas 110 card. Miles Johns did get a replacement today. He's supposed to take on Daniel Marcos. Marcos was supposed to fight on November 22nd. His opponent pulls out. Miles Johns' opponent pulls out. So the UFC decides to match them together. Actually, that fight is actually next weekend. What am I talking about? I'm completely off on this. That fight is actually taking place next weekend, so I shouldn't have even mentioned it. But Miles Johns was supposed to fight on this card, not on it. So now we're at 13 fights. All right, let's get right into it. First matchup we're going to be talking about is in the strawweight division. Talita Alencar coming in at minus 220, going up against Ariane Carnelossi, who comes in at plus 185. Alencar is coming off of a victory over Vanessa Demopoulos last time around, and it was quite an easy matchup as she was able to secure 4 of 5 takedowns and accrued 12 and a half minutes of control time. Demopoulos does not have that good of a takedown defense game, and I think that really played into Alencar's hand, and she showed off good enough wrestling to take that fight to the ground and really showcase her BJJ dominance. I think she's kind of been overblown in terms of how good of a BJJ specialist she is, especially with how much she struggled to put away opponents in recent fights. But she's pretty good with getting that control when she's able to establish that top control. Her striking, almost non-existent, I should say. I believe she used to train out of American Top Team, but has been training out of smaller gyms as of late. Most recently, it looks like she's been training at Ariane Lipski's gym, which is alongside her husband and head coach there. So it looks like Alencar's really been mixing it up, especially with Jacqueline Amrim, who just came up short this past weekend against Mizuki Inoue. But at 35 years old, I'm really expecting Alencar to just try to go for desperation takedowns, look for the takedown, and try to get to her BJJ game. Otherwise, she will tremendously struggle in the striking game against most of her opponents, just as she did against Stephanie Luciano. Now she's going up against Ariane Carnelossi, who's coming off of a bit of a layoff. I believe it's about a year and a half now. But last time around, she got her hand raised by DQ over Piera Rodriguez. Now that was a matchup where it seemed like Rodriguez was slowly chipping away at Carnelossi in the first round, and then she was able to drop Carnelossi in the second round. But unfortunately, she landed some nasty headbutts, or inadvertent headbutts. She did bring down her head with a little bit too much velocity, and she did get warned for it the first time by the referee, and then the second time, which was only 5 or 6 seconds later, that's when the referee stopped the fight. And I'm sure Carnelossi was still hurt from the punches that she got dropped with, and maybe that could be attributed more to why she was so demoralized. But she saw a way to get an easy win, and she took it, and she took the easy way out there. So credit to her for being able to get that victory, even though she was clearly losing that fight. Carnelossi, I called her a very low-level version. What's the words that I use here? I put less experienced, younger, and not as good version of Jessica Andrade. She's muscular beyond belief, and that's where she usually utilizes her style with forward movement, big power punches, tries to mix in the grappling. She does have a BJJ black belt, obviously not at the level of Alencar, but it has helped her get that submission win over Estela Nunes as well. At her best, I think she stalks her opponents, utilizes power striking, mixes in the takedowns when she sees the opportunities, and tries to get the victory that way. In this fight against Alencar, I'm kind of surprised to see Alencar as such a big favorite. At minus 220, people expect her to get Carnelossi down with relative ease, but when you're looking at these fights where opponents have taken Carnelossi down, Alencar doesn't really fit the description, right? Piera Rodriguez was able to muster up takedowns with behind punches and bunches, solid punches as well. Lupita Godinez, high-level wrestler already. Alencar, she really needs to muscle a lot of her takedowns, and I'd be surprised if she's stronger than Carnelossi. So I think Carnelossi can do a good enough job in terms of keeping this fight upright. I think her BJJ should be good enough to survive an early takedown from Alencar, but as long as this starts to get into deeper water, I think it'll be harder for Alencar to get this fight to the ground than it will be for Carnelossi to keep this fight standing. So I think we'll see Alencar start to miss out on takedowns, and that's where Carnelossi should start to put her physicality and her striking together, and that could really lead to a dominant showing, especially in the striking realm from Carnelossi. So if it wasn't for the layoff that Carnelossi is coming off of, I would have a bit more confidence here, but I'm still going to take her to win this fight, and I think she ends up TKOing Alencar in deep water here. So give me Carnelossi to pull off the upset in the first fight of the night. All right. Next up, we got Phil Rowe in this welterweight matchup coming in at plus 150, going up against Seok-Kyun Ko, who comes in at minus 175. Now, Phil Rowe pulled one out of the fire last time around as he was down on the scorecards against Angelosa going into the third round, and he saw and picked up on the fact that Losa was slowing down tremendously, and that allowed Rowe to put a barrage of punches together in the last minute of that fight to get the TKO victory and halt a 2-fight losing streak. Who knows? Maybe he would have been cut if he lost that fight against Losa, but he is still a fun, entertaining fighter with a long, lanky range that helps him pick opponents apart and allows him to snipe opponents as well. I don't think he has crazy knockout power, like he does have that knockout win over Jason Witt and even Nico Price, but I think against guys with better chins, he's going to struggle to kind of put them away, unless they completely gas out like Angelosa did. Rowe has obviously put an emphasis on his grappling as well, because that's where it seems most opponents look to take him to try to grind him out, to try to stay away from his crazy range at 80 inches at the welterweight division. And he's clearly working on his grappling, but it's been almost 6.5 years since he's pulled off a submission victory. So that's something to take into consideration as well. 35 years old, I think he's kind of on the close to getting to the decline of his career, but his frame is obviously very tough to deal with, and his speed as well. He has a nice jab straight down the pipe, sticks and moves pretty well, but he struggles against guys that are able to crowd his space and throw enough output and volume that he doesn't really know how to establish that range well enough. Now he's going up against Seok-Kyun Ko, who came in as a plus 390 underdog in his UFC debut back against Oban Elliott. and he swept Elliott on the scorecards as he stuffed a few takedowns, landed 6 takedowns of his own, and accrued nearly 10 minutes of control time, which is what a lot of people thought Elliott was going to be able to do against Ko. But Ko, like I said, good takedown defense, his hard-nosed striking approach, which gave him the Korean Mike Tyson nickname before he came to the UFC, that was on full display as well. This guy is a heavy hitter, throws great combinations. It's clear that his grappling defense has improved tremendously, which is what we saw obviously on his Contender Series performance against Cavalcanti, and then obviously against Oban Elliott, who's a pretty decent grappler in his own right. So to see Ko really mesh his game together well by mixing in his takedowns behind his power striking combinations, this guy could be, a pretty solid product in the UFC and a guy that could hold on to a UFC roster spot for a pretty long time. Now, going up against Phil Rowe, I trust Ko should be able to crowd the space of Rowe, like I said. Guys that give Rowe problems are the guys like Ko who can march forward, not stick at space and allow Rowe to get too confident from distance. And I wouldn't even be surprised to see Ko look for some takedowns. Rowe might be able to, snatch on a guillotine or snatch on a front choke series of some sort, but I think Ko should have good enough defense to avoid that, and then from there really just put it on Rowe from that top position. Whether it's takedowns or power striking, I expect Ko to be the one dictating the pace here, and I think he has good enough cardio and durability to make this go 15 minutes where he's in the driver's seat the entire time, and Ko ends up winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up, we got Elise Ardelean in this strawweight matchup coming in at minus 400, going up against Montserrat Conejo Ruiz, who comes in at plus 300. Now, Ardelean is looking to build upon her first UFC victory last time around, where she was able to pick up an upset victory over Jaime Dos Santos. That was a matchup that I believe surprised a lot of people, although Dos Santos has underperformed in her UFC career. Ardelean really put it on her and left no doubt that once that fight hit the scorecards that she was going to get her hand raised. Ardelean doesn't have a lot in terms of technique or athleticism, but she makes up for it with her sheer grit, determination, and a willingness to just exchange in the pocket and try to land more strikes than her opponent. That will obviously work against her when she faces technically superior strikers like we saw when she went up against Melissa Martinez. And I'll still never get over the fact that the live odds, I believe going into the third round of that fight against Martinez, had Ardelean up to minus 300. But I thought if you're watching with a close enough eye that Martinez was the one, even off her back foot, that was landing the more effective shots and causing a lot of trouble for Ardelean. You could even see it on Ardelean's face once the scorecards were read. But against Dos Santos, I don't think Ardelean gave enough respect to Dos Santos' striking game, so she just stood in the pocket, marched her down, and landed enough shots to eventually get that decision victory. I think that victory alone almost definitely surpasses the expectations I had for Ardelean in the UFC. I said I'd be very surprised if she was able to get even a single victory in the UFC. Not only does she have a victory now with the promotion, she comes in at minus 400 for this matchup, which is something I could not envision when she first made her UFC debut. And again, it's all matchups. It's all, style versus style, and obviously she could have an advantage in some of these matchups. And she could have some here against Montserrat Ruiz, who's looking to come back from over 2 years away from action. I think it's going to be about 3 days short of the 2-year anniversary of her last fight. And that fight was a KO loss to Eduardo Mora in a fight where she just could not contend with the physicality of her opponent. Now, Ruiz is a fighter, like I said, she's on a 3-fight losing streak, a fighter that kind of struggles if she can't get to her usual bullying style of utilizing the head and arm throw to get opponents to the ground. And from that scarf hold position, she can either look for submissions like she had against Morandin, or just control opponents and land enough shots like she did against Cheyenne Vlismas. That fight against Vlismas is still one of the most hysterical things I've seen at the UFC level, to see a fighter like Vlismas, who was, I believe, a big favorite going into that fight, struggle with the continuous head and arm throws from Ruiz. Ruiz is short. She's 5 foot, 61-inch reach, but she has a nasty throw when she's able to get that head and arm throw position. Striking leaves a lot to be desired. She's a fighter that highly relies on the grappling, but given how small she is and how much she usually gives up strength and size to her opponents, she kind of struggles to get to those positions. And again, Vlismas technically speaking, probably better than Ruiz, but she just couldn't get off on any success of her own. And then you saw when she went against Lemos, Lemos was able to finish her in 35 seconds. Jacqueline Amram, much better grappler, obviously was going to invite that head and arm throw because I'm sure she would have found her way out of it. Gets that, I believe, second round KO or third round KO. And then Eduardo Mora, another very physical fighter that was forced to go up to 125 pounds. Ruiz struggled there as well. Now here against Ardelean, Ardelean seems like a type of fighter that Ruiz could get with that head and arm throw and just pound away on her face and just win a decision or get a TKO stoppage. But given her layoff, given the confidence that's in Ardelean right now, it's kind of tough to really build up the confidence to take a shot on Ruiz. If the line continues to climb and we see Ruiz at a crazier number, maybe I'd take a little bit of a sprinkle there. But Ardelean should be able to mix this up in the striking enough to really bust up Ruiz, stick and move as best as she can, really just crowd the space of Ruiz in certain moments to get off on combinations too. Because again, Ruiz does not have much to offer in the striking realm. So I'm going to go Ardelean here and Ardelean by decision. But you got to take a look at yourself in the mirror if you're willing to parlay a fighter of Ardelean's level at minus 400. I think she wins, but you should not be parlaying that kind of chalk on that type of fighter. All right. Bantamweight's up next here as we have Ketlen Vieira coming in at plus 140, going up against Norma Dumont, who comes in at minus 160. Now, starting off on the Vieira side of things, she was able to pick up a decision victory over Macy Chiasson last time around up at featherweight. Now, Chiasson is normally the fighter that has weight-cutting issues, just as we saw in her last fight against, I can't recall who it was off the top of my head, Yana Santos. But surprisingly, it was Vieira who requested the fight be moved up a division during fight week, close to weigh-in day. And I think Vieira highly benefited from that weight change because she was able to match the physicality of Chiasson, and she was the one actually getting to her grappling in the second and third rounds. Chiasson could not get to her takedowns. And then on the feet, I thought it was pretty obvious that Vieira was the better striker. I think I picked Chiasson to win that fight, but again, I really expected her to utilize her physicality to get the better of Vieira. Now, Vieira had a very solid start to the UFC. I believe it was about 4 straight victories that she was able to muster up between 2016 and 2018. But now she's 5-4 over her last 9 fights, and she's 2-2 over her last 4 fights. She really can't pick up much consistency at this stage of her career. If you guys remember, I think she was pretty close to a title shot when she was going up against Irene Aldana, but unfortunately she got knocked out that night. Now, speaking of Irene Aldana, that's who Norma Dumont was able to butcher and easily defeat on the scorecards back in September of last year at the Sphere, where Dumont opened up one of the nastiest cuts we've ever seen in a fight, and somehow the referee kept that fight going, and Dumont was able to get the win there by decision. Dumont has quietly put together a 5-0 winning streak right now, but she's 8-1 over her last 9 fights. The fight before that run was her UFC debut against Megan Anderson, where she got knocked out in the first round, but she's really done a great job in terms of evolving her game and being successful, especially at 135 pounds, considering she used to fight at 145. She has a very good jab, likes to really... even if she's moving backwards like she was against Aldana, she was meeting Aldana with solid counters and solid straight shots down the pipe, and I think that's what caused Aldana a ton of trouble. If Dumont needs to get this into the grappling, she's very strong and physical, where she can get opponents to the ground or even clinch them against the cage and just chip away at them with that approach as well. I like Dumont here a fair bit. I think Aldana is a better striker than Vieira, and we obviously saw that when Vieira got knocked out by Aldana. And I think that seeing the way Dumont approached Aldana, I think she can do that here against Vieira, who I think might be a little bit of a step behind in terms of speed as well. So look for Dumont to land better shots. Look for her to counter and disrupt the combinations of Vieira. And if Dumont wants, I think she can out-grapple Vieira as well, whether it's putting her on the cage or looking to take her to the ground and smothering her from that top position. It's kind of embarrassing that the UFC has put Dumont so low on the card, especially considering that I think she's marketable. She's on a 5-fight winning streak, and she's definitely in line for title contention, especially if she's able to get the win here. but maybe the UFC is just looking for a finish from her. I don't know if she'll be able to muster that up here against Vieira. I still think Dumont wins, and I love this line here at -160, so I'm going to go Dumont and Dumont by decision. Next up in the middleweight division, we got Dante Johnson coming in at -350 for his UFC debut, going up against Rodriguez Dumas, who's coming in at +285. Now, starting off on the Johnson side of things, he just earned his contract on the Contender Series just over 2 months ago with a 64-second knockout of Darian Abbey. That was a matchup where he was able to utilize his speed and power to find the chin of his opponent and get him out of there pretty quickly. And that's largely been the story of Johnson's career, especially as a pro. This guy's finished all 6 of his opponents in the first round because of that explosivity and power that he brings. His first 3 fights at the weight as a pro were at heavyweight. Then he dropped down to light heavyweight for the Ryan Parker and James Ford fights. And then for Darian Abbey, it was a short notice spot. So he went up to heavyweight. I believe he weighed in at 209 and still picked up the win. And in the lead up to that matchup, he largely talked about the fact that he was too small for the heavyweight and light heavyweight division and expected to eventually make his middleweight debut when he got to the highest level. And that's what he's doing here. You know, a lot of people might think this is a quick turnaround for a guy to go from fighting at heavyweight to drop down to middleweight. But when you take into consideration that he only weighed 209 for that heavyweight matchup, he's even talked about that he has enough, baby fat on him that he can still trim off to get to 185 pounds. It will be interesting to see him at this new physique and how that could play into his success as a mixed martial artist. I believe he had some sort of athletic background. I can't put my finger on it, but for the most part, this is a guy that just crashes the pocket with big shots. On the amateur scene for the 2 fights that he did go to the scorecards, he largely leaned on his wrestling and physicality in those fights, but his cardio is still a big question mark, especially fighting at this UFC level. Now he's going up against Rodriguez Dumas, who's had some rough spots as of late. You know, he had some decent wins over Cody Brundage and Abu Azaitar, even Dennis Tululian, but then getting knocked out by Nursultan Ruziboyev after an eye poke, quickly getting knocked out by Michal Oleksiejczuk. You know, he seemed to be blocking a lot of the ground and pound shots from Oleksiejczuk, but he just wasn't moving, especially with the referee constantly reminding him to move. He just couldn't get out of that spot, and he protested the finish. But again, you can't be eating that many shots and doing nothing and expect the referee to give you more leash. Then the Zach Reese fight. That fight only lasted about a minute before he got hit with a very nasty nut shot. And, I think he was carried out on a stretcher, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a bad nut shot that had him crumbled, and he just could not continue after that. And that was a month and a half ago. Now he's taking the shot against Dante Johnson to try to get back into the win column and showcase that he still has something to offer, even though a lot of people don't really rate him anymore. Not just because of his out of cage shenanigans and constantly getting knocked up and or locked up or arrested or charged with stuff. Also, him putting out his bank account and stuff and saying that he's struggling. Kind of his own doing in a sense with the type of trouble that he constantly found himself in. But, he's a decent fighter. He's a guy that has some slick chokes like we saw when he fought Matej Peñas on the Contender Series to earn his UFC contract. He has a decent kicking game from distance if he needs it. He's pretty mobile with the way that he strikes. He can mix it up in the clinch if he needs to. He also has a decent grappling game if he needs to as well. So I think the perception or the public perception of him is so low, which is why he finds himself as such a big underdog in the spot, especially against a guy that's not as proven. Right? Johnson's been going out there and starching these fools because he has a speed and power advantage, but now fighting a little bit faster guys at middleweight, fighting somebody that's actually gone up against legitimate competition, Dumas could spring the upset. We cannot overlook, how many times we've seen positions like this where a guy comes off the Contender Series with a big knockout victory. His record mainly reads first round knockouts, and he's not going out there against or going up against guys that are actually going to give him much resistance or can stand up to his power. Can Dumas stand up to his power? Maybe, maybe not. But to put Dante Johnson at minus 350, I think is absolutely wild against a guy who's gone up against, the type of competition that Dumas has gone against, and even the type of well-rounded game that Dumas brings to the table. So if Dumas can avoid that early striking danger or that power of Johnson and continue to just kick his body and stay at range, he could have some success. I know Johnson's coming down from a heavyweight, but he's still only 5'8" with a 74-inch reach. Dumas has a 6-inch height advantage, as well as a 5-inch reach advantage. So he's going to be longer. So there is going to be a lot of space for Johnson to try to have to cover to try to get to Dumas. So I'm going to lean on a little bit more of the experience of Dumas. I think Dumas chips away at Johnson. I also wouldn't be surprised if Dumas looks to take Johnson down and utilize his at least BJJ edge that I think that he has here. I think the submission prop on Dumas is also all the way up at plus 1,300, which I think might not be a bad shot either. So I'm going to go Dumas here. Again, a lot of people might scoff at this pick, but this is highly odds-based. Taking a guy with as much experience as Dumas against a guy that's just been going out there and knocking very low-level competition out in the first round, he's never been challenged. Dumas may or may not be that guy, but I'm going to play odds here. I'm going to go Dumas and Dumas by submission. Next up in the bantamweight division, we got Timmy Cuamba coming in at minus 120, going up against Chang Ho Lee, who comes in at plus 100. Now, Cuamba is looking to build off his spectacular knockout victory over Roberto Romero from last time out. And that was a matchup where I thought he was pretty much losing 95% of that fight until he was able to land that beautiful flying knee to hurt Romero and then follow up with some big shots to try to get the finish. To Cuamba's, or at least to Romero's defense, I believe that was a pretty quick stoppage. I thought Romero got back to his feet pretty quickly. He was able to defend some of the ground and pound shots that were coming at him, and Cuamba pretty much got bailed out by a quick stoppage. But that would have been the third loss for Cuamba if he couldn't pull that one out of the fire. He lost to Balaji Oki in his short notice UFC debut. Made a decent account of himself, but showcased how uncomfortable he can be in the striking realm, and that could lead to him losing fights, just like he lost against Lucas Almeida in a fight where he couldn't really get much going until the last round. And even against Romero, he tried getting to his wrestling, couldn't get to it effectively enough, and he was just on his back foot the entire time, eating shots from Romero, who was marching him down. Cuamba, earlier in his career, utilized a lot more wrestling and top control, trying to muzzle opponents on the ground and doing good work from that top position, and he usually has a good enough gas tank to do it as well. In the striking realm, he's kind of found a little bit more of a love for it, on the Contender Series, and then obviously that big win over Michael Stack to get him that UFC contract on short notice, or that UFC call-up on short notice. But you're seeing against UFC level strikers, he's really struggling and really seems uncomfortable, constantly moving backwards and leaning more on flashy, unorthodox strikes to try to catch his opponents off guard and try to find wins that way. That's not going to get him too far in the UFC, and I think that's why the line is slowly starting to move to the Korean side of things here, because he may not be able to find that type of success. Now, Lee is on a solid winning streak right now. He did a great job in his very closely contested matchup against Long Zhao, which was a road to UFC finale. Very close fight, could have gone either way, but Lee was able to scrape that one out and earn himself a UFC contract. And then he followed it up with his first official UFC matchup and victory, where he was able to get that TKO over Cortavius Romeus in the second round of their matchup. Now, Lee looks very comfortable and confident in the grappling realm, so much so that you don't really see him too nervous or too fretted by the fact that he was getting his back taken by Romeus. It seemed like Lee knew that he was going to be able to get out of those spots, and then when he did, he made Romeus pay for it with big ground and pound submission attempts, and then eventually getting that ground and pound finish in the at the ending of the second round. He throws a lot of heat in his shots. I wouldn't say he's as comfortable or not as comfortable in the striking realm as Cuamba is, but at least he throws with conviction and he tries to at least push the pace, keep the pace of a fight at a high level so that he can make opponents make mistakes and then try to take advantage of it. More often than not, he tries to take advantage of it in the grappling realm. He seems very comfortable on the mat, has very slick jiu-jitsu, great defense, and also finds a good way to get dominant positions and then eventually find finishes over opponents that way as well. This is obviously a step up in competition for Lee as he takes on Cuamba compared to what he had against Cortavius Romeus, but he has beaten fighters that are better than Cuamba, in my opinion, like Long Zhao and a couple other regional opponents that he's defeated. The issue here is, if Lee goes for a grapple-heavy approach, I think he can struggle, or he will struggle against the wrestling of Cuamba. Cuamba is not a bad wrestler, and I think that Lee could struggle to get Cuamba down if he just goes for traditional takedowns or doesn't set up his entries well. Lee needs to put big punches in front of Cuamba to get his guard high, to make him thinking that they're in a striking battle, and then from there, I think he can do a good enough job in terms of changing levels and eventually getting the fight to the ground from there. Cuamba will constantly be moving backwards, so look for Lee to really land those big shots, march him down, hopefully cutting off the cage, chewing up the leg a little bit to slow Cuamba down. But I think once Lee is able to really find that way to penetrate the guard of Cuamba, he should be able to get takedowns and get some control time, maybe find a decision or submission, or maybe grind this one out and win it on the scorecards. But I do agree with the line slowly moving towards the Korean, who could find himself as a slight favorite once the fight takes place. But I'm going to go Lee here and Lee by decision, and I like him as an underdog in this fight. All right, next up in the light heavyweight division, we got Billy Elekana coming in at minus 280. A lot of action coming on him today alone. He was about minus 240, minus 250 just a few hours ago. He's going up against Kevin Christian, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Elekana is coming off of a very tepid-paced, let's say it was a shitty fight against Ibo Aslan, but he did enough to outstrike him. I believe it was 35-28 on significant strikes over 15 minutes, and that was enough for Elekana to get his hand raised on the scorecards. That was a fight where a lot of people thought Aslan's power could really be the difference maker, but Elekana's striking defense was on point. He threatened with a few takedown attempts as well, and I think Aslan kind of knew that was coming, hence why he was able to stop those takedowns and keep that fight standing. But even in the stand-up round, Elekana at his core is a very solid kickboxer with good timing, good distance management, and a really good sharp jab down the pipe. He's really worked on his grappling as of late. I believe it's Hani Marks that's often in his corner because he trains out of Vegas, but he mainly trains out of BJJ gyms. To see why he was going for a grapple-heavy approach against Bogdan Guskov in his short-notice UFC debut and had some decent success with it in the first round. Tried doing it to Ibo Aslan, but Aslan was well prepared, obviously training in Dagestan. He knew that Elekana would probably take that approach, so he did a great job in terms of stuffing the takedowns from Elekana, but he just couldn't keep up with Elekana on the feet. Again, very tepid pace fight in the first place. I think Elekana is highly underrated. I know he's a chalky favorite in this spot, but I feel like he could have an argument for being even chalkier. Now we'll switch on over to the Brazilian side of things here with Kevin Christian, who picked up his UFC contract through the Contender Series last season as he found a second-round submission over Francesco Mazzio. That was a very ugly fight where Mazzio obviously seemed to have a bit of a power advantage in the striking realm, and then once this fight was taken to the ground, I thought, it was very weird that Mazzio was the one that actually had that top control and was the one looking for takedowns, where Christian, BJJ black belt, that's probably where he wanted that fight to take place. And he was threatening with a few submission attempts and trying to throw some submissions up, but Mazzio was easily able to shut it down. And it seemed like Mazzio gassed himself out, trying to out-grapple Christian, and that eventually led to that second round finish there for Christian as Mazzio really started to slow down, and Christian was able to get that quick tap once he slapped on that arm triangle armbar position. Not arm triangle, it was a triangle armbar position. But again, I don't think Christian is all that great. I think he's just been underrated throughout his career. Even his LFA win over Miguel Porto, that was his first fight after 4.5 years away from action, and that was a crazy fight as well. He was able to pull off the big upset there, but a guy that slows pretty easily. I don't think has much to offer in the striking realm other than the fact that he's tall and lanky and might be able to land a weird shot, but he looks to mainly get his opponents to the ground and try to find that submission due to the BJJ black belt that he brings to the table. I think Elekana can stuff the takedowns of Christian. I think Elekana can easily outstrike Christian. I think he'll be the faster striker as well. And as long as he doesn't eat a clean shot down the pipe, one could land and could possibly cause Elekana some issues, but I really think Elekana is the far superior striker. I think that will allow him to break Christian down, and that could lead to Elekana eventually getting a second or third round TKO as Christian is gasping for air and unable to muster up a comeback of his own. Even if Christian is able to get this fight to the ground, I don't think his BJJ is at the level of submitting Elekana, who, like I said, has firmly entrenched himself at BJJ gyms in the Vegas area. And it wouldn't surprise me as well if from exhaustion that Elekana is able to submit Christian. So again, I think this is a step down in competition for Elekana and a very winnable fight for Elekana as well. So I'm going to go Elekana and Elekana by knockout. All right, next up in the flyweight division, we got Nascimento coming in at -260, going up against short notice replacement Cody Durden, who comes in at +220, stepping in for Rafael Estevam. I don't want to speculate, but I feel like Estevam probably pulled out because he has had weight issues throughout his career, and he probably saw this getting closer and closer to fight time, that he wasn't going to get the weight off. So rather than having a debacle on the scales, just pull out altogether. Anyway, Nascimento looking to add to his 3-fight winning streak now, most recently picking up that decision victory over Jafel Filho. That was a fight where it didn't start off too hot for the favorite that night, but Nascimento was able to turn the tables around that 6 or 7 minute mark, and it was clear that Filho was starting to slow down, and Nascimento was going to start cruising, especially with his control and ability to keep Filho in defensive positions. That's where Nascimento is best, utilizing his aggressive BJJ approach to find submissions like he did against Carlos Hernandez, or out-grapple guys like he did against Jake Hadley and Jafel Filho. Nascimento is an underrated fighter with a pretty impressive 21-6 record through his 27-fight career. Not a guy that I expect to challenge for the title, but a guy that is going to be pretty stubborn and hard to deal with for a lot of guys, especially if they can't stay away from the grappling of Nascimento. Nascimento is still working on his wrestling game, and it's at a decent enough level that he can find the way to the back of his opponents, and then from there kind of just jump on it and just ride those positions out, try to pull his opponents to the ground once he gets their back as well. He's very difficult to deal with once he secures that back position. Striking, still a lot to be desired there. He throws a lot of kicks to eventually try to close that distance and get to the grappling game, where he is obviously most comfortable there. Now, on the Cody Durden side of things, it kind of looks bad, right? 1-4 in his last 5, a lot of red there, but this is a guy that's starting to take pride in a lot of the short notice matchups that he's willing to accept. It's kind of just working against him, though. This is a guy, this will be his 14th fight in 5 years. He had a solid 4-fight winning streak between 2022 and 2023, but now it's clear that he's starting to struggle against the tougher guys in the division. 4 of those losses, though, right? Those 4 losses alone are pretty acceptable. Tagir Ulanbekov, Bruno Silva, and that was a fight where it seemed like the momentum was really shifting towards Durden until Silva landed a nasty uppercut to hurt him. Then he was able to finish Matt Schnell. Then he lost to Joshua Van, who fights for a title at the ending of the year. And then he lost by knockout to Jose Ochoa, who may have just lost to Asu Almabayev, but is still a very high-level prospect in the flyweight division. Durden will scrap with the best of them and try to put on a spirited effort, but his shortcomings in the striking realm will often cause him issues against guys that he can't take to the ground. And then when he gets guys to the ground, he has to be sure that he has a good enough BJJ practitioner to try to defeat those guys. And I don't think he has that edge here against Nascimento. Now, not so much to the point that I'm saying, hey, -260 on Nascimento is a steal. I don't think that. I think Durden's wrestling could help him a little bit in terms of trying to out-scramble Nascimento, but I think there will be instances where Nascimento eventually finds the back of Durden, hops on it, and eventually finds a submission of his own. I like the under 2.5 in this most. Durden is a guy with 7 of his 13 UFC fights have finished inside the distance, with 3 of those coming by submission loss. And you're going up against a guy like Nascimento, who is obviously very good in terms of taking the back and finding submissions. I think Durden could have a little bit of an edge in the striking round with the power that he throws with, but I think Nascimento can counter that with level changes, engaging in the clinch, and eventually getting to his BJJ. So I'm going to go Nascimento by submission as my prediction, but with the under 2.5 roughly around that pick'em line, I don't mind taking a shot on him there. Next up in the welterweight division, we got Charles Radtke coming in at -160, going up against Daniel Frunza, who comes in at +140. Now, Radtke was coming off of a knockout loss at the hands of Mike Malott from earlier this year in a matchup where he could not contend with Malott on the feet. Radtke is a BJJ black belt, but it's obvious that he prefers slinging leather, and that obviously helped him out when he was able to knock out the likes of Gilbert Urbina and Matthew Semmelsberger. But then when he fights superior strikers like Carlos Praches and Mike Malott, it doesn't really work out for him. I think it's smarter for him to go back to his BJJ approach, where he's been pretty aggressive on the ground and looks for finishes pretty quickly, rather than looking to strike with other strikers who are looking to just knock his head off. He trains in Chicago alongside Ignacio Bahamundes, and I think Brendan Allen is a part of that VFS gym now. Bilal Muhammad, obviously the biggest name out of that gym. And Radtke's learned a lot from them, but he's 35 years old. So I wonder how much more he can evolve at this stage of his career. He's going up against Daniel Frunza, who's coming off of a very unfortunate loss to Rhys McKee last time around. I believe that was back in April. And that was a fight where, right from jump, McKee was able to hurt Frunza, busted up the lip, swelled up the eye of Frunza, and Frunza tried staying in it. He tried throwing back. He tried recovering from getting that much damage done to him. Unfortunately, it was the doctor who had to stop the fight after the first round and give Frunza that loss in his UFC debut. But this is a guy that's clearly improved from earlier on in his career. During his LFA run, especially his last two fights with the LFA, he knocked out some very tough competition like Jalen Fuller and Harris Tulunzik, two guys that have been highly touted coming or will eventually come to the UFC or were seen as guys that would make it to the UFC. And Frunza was able to knock both of them out. And then even against Vladimir Kutsi, he did a great job in terms of battering him and eventually getting the finish there. Frunza is a very skilled striker, and that's where he does his best work. Good combinations, good power, good footwork. His grappling defense has improved tremendously. He's done a great job in terms of shutting down the takedowns and top control of his opponents, which has often caused him issues earlier on in his career. He trains out of a smaller gym. I think it's alongside Dumont Blackshear. He's trained at a few different gyms in the Miami area, but I think Blackshear would be his most notable training partner. In this matchup against Radtke, I'm fully expecting Radtke to try to get back into the win column by looking for grappling and looking for takedowns. And I think he's going to struggle to do that here against Frunza, who I think has a good enough takedown defense game to force Radtke to strike with him. And then in the striking realm, I think Frunza is the superior striker. I think he can land with more power. I think he can counter Radtke effectively. And if Radtke does come out with the grapple-heavy approach early, I think once Frunza stifles that and causes Radtke to strike with him, Radtke will start second-guessing himself a little bit after game plan A goes out the window. Now, I'm not saying this with certainty that Radtke's going to come out there and grapple right away, but you would have to assume that would be the best way for him to win this matchup, especially against a guy that strikes the way that Frunza does. So I'm still going to go Frunza here. I'm going to go Frunza by knockout, and I think that earns him his first UFC win. Maybe highlight reel-esque, but I think he has enough power, speed, and striking edge here to knock out the 35-year-old. All right. Next up in the featherweight division, we got Isaac Dulgarian coming in at minus 260, going up against Yadir Del Valle, who comes in at plus 220. Now, starting off on the Dulgarian side of things, he was emphatically able to get back into the win column after submitting Brendan Moreau in the second round of their matchup. That was a first bounce-back win for Dulgarian after suffering his first loss at the hands of Christian Rodriguez, and I think a lot of people were surprised that Dulgarian had to go into the second round to finish Moreau. He did get dominant position almost immediately in that fight, but after a couple failed submission attempts, he eventually had to break down Moreau a little more and eventually get that submission in the second round. Dulgarian is a very solid and strong wrestler who does a great job in terms of implementing his dominance from that top position, whether it's with the ground and pound or submissions. But the one time we've seen him extended against a guy like Christian Rodriguez, that's where we see Dulgarian's gas tank start to come into issue. But that was a great learning lesson for the 29-year-old, who I think will be honing in on trying to manage his gas tank better, especially when it's starting to become harder and harder to finish some of his opponents. He has a very good arm triangle choke. He has some decent power in his striking, but let's not beat around the bush too much. It's all about the wrestling, takedowns, and top control for a guy like Dulgarian. Now he's going up against Yadir Del Valle, who comes in with an undefeated 9-0 record, most recently picking up a UFC debut victory with a submission over Connor Matthews. Del Valle is an all-action, all-aggression type fighter who loves to push the pace, stay in his opponent's bubble pretty much and overwhelm them, either with power strikes or even looking to get to grappling of his own. He's a guy that can cause a lot of issues to guys that need to be a little bit more comfortable in the cage to find some success. He faced a guy on the Contender series, Antonio Montero, I believe that was the guy's name, who had 3 times the amount of experience as him, and he largely dominated that for the entirety of the 15 minutes that they shared the cage. The one fight that I saw him kind of struggling was against Michael Aswell back when he used to fight for Fury FC, and that was a fight where it looked like the output and volume of Aswell was causing Del Valle a lot of trouble, but Del Valle was able to land 2 big shots in 2 separate rounds to sway the judges back into his favor. So he has that power to change, the optics of a fight, to change the momentum of a fight. But I wonder how much he can carry that going deeper into his UFC career. I think he has a pretty high ceiling, but we have to see him really pull it together when he's facing guys that are going to give him more resistance and competition than Connor Matthews, per se. But I will say he faced some of the better competition on the Fury FC scene, which will obviously have him prepared for fighting in the UFC. But I think he has a tough matchup here against Dulgarian, who I think will have the grappling advantage. And I think that we will see constant resistance from Del Valle, but I think Dulgarian will do a good enough job in terms of maintaining that control, some mat returns, constantly looking like he's the one in control, moving forward, thwarting that aggression of Del Valle. But this could surely play out closer than the odds suggest. I know Dulgarian is highly touted, and a lot of people are just looking past the Christian Rodriguez loss, but Del Valle is a solid prospect in his own right. But I want to give Dulgarian a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt here, considering how good of a wrestler he is. And I think that's going to cause Del Valle some issues here. So I'll go Dulgarian by decision. The over 2.5 is at plus 140. So that may not be a bad way to approach this. I know Dulgarian is mostly a finisher, but facing stellar enough competition and good enough resistance will cause him to go the distance, just as we saw against Christian Rodriguez and just as we could potentially see here against Del Valle. So I'm going to go Dulgarian and Dulgarian by decision. Our next up in the welterweight division, we got Jeremiah Wells coming in at plus 110, going up against Themba Gorimbo, who comes in at minus 130. Now, Wells is returning from a 1.5 years away from action after coming up short against Max Griffin last time around. 2 of his last 3 fights have actually gone to a split decision where he now finds himself 1-1. That one win, obviously, over Matthew Semmelsberger. It seems his cardio is the issue in his game. Obviously, he starts to slow down later on in matchups. He's very powerful with everything that he does, from his strikes to his takedowns to his control from top position. He's a BJJ black belt as well, so it's obvious that he looks to get fights to the ground. If he sees an advantage there, he'll look to get to it pretty quickly. And I think that he has nasty power as well, just as he showed against Court McGee. He's a guy that I think is somewhat underrated, but he is also 39 years old, so that's something to take into account. I believe he trains alongside like the Dawkins brothers and those guys in Philadelphia. I believe alongside Joe Pyfer as well. Unless he's changed camps as of late, I haven't seen anything, but he is a guy that is firmly entrenched at a great training camp. And this is a guy that doesn't do anything half-assed. Again, all power, all gas. Even when he starts to slow down, he still throws with a lot of power, but it comes a lot slower than it does earlier on in fights. Now, it goes up against Themba Gorimbo, who lost by club and sub last time around against Vicente Luque. And that's a fight that I'll continuously beat myself up for picking Gorimbo over Luque. Not so much to the point that I bet Gorimbo in that fight. I knew that Luque could spring the upset, but Luque looked, career-wise, he looked at his worst in the fight before that, right? Like, he was going up against Joaquin Buckley. He looked slow, looked like he was stuck in mud, and I thought Gorimbo could take advantage of that, but Luque landed a clean early shot that hurt Gorimbo, and that put Luque into one of his favorite submissions to put Gorimbo to sleep that night. I think I only took the under 2.5 in that fight, which I thought was easy money. Gorimbo is a guy that I think that has largely succeeded from his gangly strength and his just physicality. That's why he's been able to grind out guys like Takashi Sato, Ramiz Brahimaj, Nico Price. He's still a little wild and reckless in the striking realm, but as soon as he gets a hold of opponents, he seems very strong and sturdy and tough to deal with, which is why he's been able to convert some of these takedowns and top control. And I think that's what led to some of the success he's had in the UFC. But you see, when he's fighting technically better fighters that can stay away from that strength, he will find some spots that he could struggle in. I'm surprised that Wells is the underdog here. I get that he's 39. I get that he's been out for a while, but I think that he's much better than Gorimbo, specifically in the grappling realm. I could see Wells look to get this fight to the ground, which I don't think he'll have all that much issue with. And then from there, I think he can get to a position to eventually find a submission. So I love Wells in this spot. I think he can stay away from the grappling threat that Gorimbo presents and actually be the better grappler himself. And I think that will lead to Wells securing a submission and getting the tap. So I'm expecting a finish in this matchup. I'm expecting it to be Wells to be the one to get the win. And like I said, I think it comes by submission. All right. Heavyweights throwing down in the co-main event now, as we have Waldo Cortes-Acosta coming in at plus 110, going up against Delija, who comes in at minus 130. Now, when I studied this fight late last week, Cortes-Acosta was minus 140. So a lot of love coming in on the Croatian fighter, Delija, and I think for good reason. But let's get into this fight a little deeper first. We'll start off on the Cortes-Acosta side, who came up short against Sergey Pavlovich earlier this year by decision, and I felt like I called that fight to a T. Pavlovich, prior to that, had gotten lit up by Alexander Volkov and lost a decision, and then I think he learned a lot from that fight, that he can't just rely on that knockout power that got him that interim title shot in the first place. And I thought he showed it against Cortes-Acosta great. Cortes-Acosta, very solid striker for heavyweight standards, good jab, good output, good variety of shots. But Pavlovich was the one landing heavier and harder shots consistently enough so that once the fight ended up hitting the scorecards, he was the one that ended up getting his hand raised. And I think Cortes-Acosta was kind of stumped by that he lost that fight, even though it looked like he was doing some decent work with his jab from distance. Cortes-Acosta is not a guy that runs for his finishes, right? He's only gotten a few, I think only 2 finishes in his 7 UFC wins thus far, and a lot of that is a testament to him just picking apart his opponents from distance, not throwing a whole lot of power unless he sees the opening to throw it, like he did against, I believe, Lucas Dresky was one of the guys that he finished, and then obviously Ryan Spann in the second round of their matchup. And he's shown off in the Sergey Spivak fight that his takedown defense is heavily improved, especially after that loss that he suffered against Marcos Rogerio de Lima. The issue becomes, especially in that Sergey Spivak fight, Cortes-Acosta much more athletic than Sergey Spivak, and Spivak didn't have enough of a striking game plan to try to cause Cortes-Acosta enough issues so that he can try to sprinkle in some takedowns behind it. I think Delija is more than experienced enough to try to do what Spivak was doing, but much better. Now, Delija made his UFC debut successfully by knocking out Marcin Tybura at the beginning of September in a fight where he seemed like he knew he needed to make a point and statement right off the bat. He blitzed Tybura quickly, wasn't able to land the big shot. Tybura tried clinching him against the cage, and as Delija got his energy back, once they broke back out, we saw Delija smother Tybura again, and he was able to find that big shot to put the veteran away. And that actually avenged a loss for Delija from earlier on in his career, 10 years ago, specifically, where Tybura and Delija fought for an M1 global title, and Delija unfortunately broke his leg, Anderson Silva style, and was out of action for a year or two, I believe. Then he came back, he went to the PFL, won a PFL title, he went 8-3 with the promotion, then he eventually was released after his loss to Valentin Moldavsky in a fight where it looked like he had injured something, and Moldavsky kind of just picked up on it and smothered him. Delija went back to the regional scene, got a quick win over former UFC heavyweight Jorgen De Castro, and that was enough for him to eventually make it to the UFC. He's a power striker, but at his best, I think he does a great job in the clinch and with his takedowns, but it's the respect that he gets from his opponents with his striking that makes his grappling come and his clinching come a little bit easier. And I think that's what he's going to be able to do here against Cortes-Acosta. Cortes-Acosta may have a little bit of a speed advantage, and that could help him clip Delija whenever Delija tries to close the distance, but Delija is very strong and normally has a pretty good durability and has a good chin. The Moldavsky loss, again, I think there was some sort of groin issue that Delija was dealing with, and he was really struggling to get going. But here against Cortes-Acosta, as long as Delija is healthy enough, I think he lands big shots on Cortes-Acosta, and that allows him to engage in the clinch, land a few takedowns, and then really control and muster up a solid win here. So I'm going to go Delija. I'm going to go Delija by decision, and it seems like the public is swaying that way as well, taking him from a plus 120 dog to a minus 130 favorite now. All right, that brings us to a very entertaining main event, or what promises to be an entertaining main event in the featherweight division, as we have Steve Garcia coming in at minus 135, going up against David Onama, who comes in at plus 115. I'll start off on the Steve Garcia side of things, who picked up his 6th straight victory, probably his biggest win as well, as he outpointed Calvin Kattar en route to a decision victory back in July. Now, that was a very closely lined fight, and a lot of people, including myself, thought that the technical superiority of Kattar in the striking realm would have been enough for him to really chip away at the power striking style of Garcia. But it seems that power muzzled Kattar's approach and muzzled his offense and left Kattar kind of reeling the entire time while Garcia was dictating the pace, dictating the range, landing his big shots, not landing anything cleanly enough to put Kattar away, but enough to make it clear that he won that fight and had no issues really going about it the way that he did. I've kind of put Garcia in a box of being a finish or bust fighter. Obviously, he showed a lot in that Kattar fight that he could do a little bit more than that. But I think a lot of it was also, him fighting the skeleton of Kattar at that point in time. We haven't seen Kattar have much success in this stage of his career. I thought it was a good enough stylistic matchup for Kattar, but it just doesn't seem like he has it anymore. And I thought that was enough for Garcia to get that win there. But Garcia has often found himself in trouble, whether it's the grappling realm, being behind on volume, or even, Kyle Nelson was able to get a pretty dominant position, but not get the finish against Garcia when they threw down. But Garcia just has fight-changing power, which is absolutely crazy to think of. And not a guy that a lot of people pegged to get to a main event slot in the UFC from earlier on in his UFC career. This is a guy that was knocked out by Mahashate maybe 2 years ago at this point in time. But really good run now for Garcia to constantly get these finishes and then taking tougher competition each time out. As going up against David Onama, who's on a 4-fight winning streak, last time picking up a solid win over Giga Chikadze. Not only was it a solid win, but it was a mature win that showed a lot of growth in Onama's game, who was mainly a headhunter throughout his UFC or MMA career. But I think that loss against Nate Landwehr really changed the perspective of his game, and he's become a much more well-rounded fighter. From pulling off that upset victory over Gabriel Santos in a fight where he was hurt pretty badly. Also, I believe the Jonathan Pierce, no, it wasn't the Jonathan Pierce fight, the Roberto Romero fight, and even Giga Chikadze fight. He was hurt in those fights, but managed to battle back from adversity and really get the fight back into a spot where he felt comfortable. He has good hand speed, good power. His grappling game has obviously improved to a solid rate, just as we saw when he was able to out-grapple Giga Chikadze, get himself out of bad positions. It's just a striking defense at times that gives me some pause. He's fast, powerful, but when he gets clipped, he can be hurt. But he's done a great job in terms of just getting himself back together and eventually, getting the fight back into his favor. Here against Garcia, it's going to be a tough one for both guys because both guys have shown some issues in the striking defense. And I feel like Onama is the technically superior striker here against Garcia. And I think his slight speed advantage could help him land those straight shots against Garcia and really counter him and find success of his own. But also the grappling improvements of Onama, I think that could help him get him out of those bad spots against Garcia here, who again often overthrows to the point that he can be countered with a level change and a takedown. But again, that fight-ending power from Garcia makes it so hard to bet against him, especially against a guy who has eaten some big shots. And even though he's recovered from some of these spots, maybe Garcia has that type of power that Onama can't come back from. I've been going back and forth about this fight all week, leading up to even the recording of this breakdown, even after I did my written breakdown. I'm still finding myself on the Onama side of things. I just think he has more tools. I think he's a better game planner. And if he does dig into his grappling pocket here, mixing it up with his strikes, I think that he can get more dominant positions than Garcia, or even just take advantage of the striking defense issues we've often seen in Garcia's game as well. So I'm going to go Onama here. I think he either ends up clipping Garcia with a counter or getting some good work off on the ground. But again, all of that can be changed by one big shot from Garcia as well. But in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go Onama. Not a whole lot of confidence there. I think he ends up getting the finish. I think it probably comes within 2.5 rounds. I don't see this going into main event rounds, but I think Onama ends up getting the win here. But again, it's hard to bet against Garcia. So be very cautious in this matchup, folks. Both guys have some striking defense issues that the other guy can capitalize on. So it might end up being a coin flip. And in terms of being a coin flip, you probably go with the underdog with Onama, who sits at plus 115. All right. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 110. Again, apologies for the tardiness here. I was supposed to drop this on Monday night, but I don't know if you guys heard. The Blue Jays went into the 18th inning and ended up losing, but we're going to try to get it back today as they head into Game 4. But I was hoping that the game would end at a reasonable time, and then I'd be able to finish my study and get this podcast out for you guys Monday night. But here I am Tuesday getting it out for you guys. But it is what it is. Tomorrow I'll be back with my usual content, but I will also be doing my my live chat for the members only on YouTube. If you want to be a part of that, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, right here on YouTube, hit that join button below and you guys will see it there. And I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.